Okay, so paper or plastic, those may soon be the only two real options whenever it comes to cigar molds. And it's a serious problem. That's right, today we're talking about cigar molds, the unsung heroes. It's not being talked about nearly enough, in my opinion, and I think part of the reason is really pretty simple. Most people don't have a real answer as to what we're going to do, what direction we're going to head. Now, plastic is the direction a lot of factories have already moved forward on. And to be fair, it solves some pretty big problems, but it also creates a long list of smaller problems that more people probably should be thinking about. So today we're going to be digging into what those problems are, and we're going to talk about what a cigar mold actually is, the different types of cigar molds, how they evolved over time, and a lot that has changed, not just about cigar manufacturing, but also whenever you walk into a lounge and you want to buy a cigar. Okay, so first, what is a cigar mold? The cigar mold is actually what gives the cigar its shape. Once the cigar is bunched, whether it be entubado or tabacchiato or book folded, a method you commonly see in the Dominican Republic these days, the principle is always the same. You are creating a form, and that form we call a mold. So at that stage, the bunch is already made up of filler tobaccos with the binder on the cigar. But the wrapper is going to come on later. Now, that bunch is placed into this mold. The mold closes around the cigar, and it has the ability to create a consistent shape around that cigar. And really, that's where some of the big problems begin. The first type of mold that we need to talk about is paper molds. We often call them here in Nicaragua tabacchiato. Tabacchiato is a style of rolling where the cigar is built from the center out and then wrapped tightly in paper with the binder on. In that case, the paper itself is acting as the mold, and it's in here real tight. To help explain how this works, I brought in Kevin Baxter, one of our residency Hall of Master blenders. Kevin is exceptionally skilled at this method, and what makes it even more unusual is he can do this really well across a whole range of different sizes. That's not a common skill for someone to acquire. So rather than just describe it, we're going to go ahead and show it. So I'm here with Kevin Baxter, and he's going to show us how to roll tabacchiato using paper instead of a regular mold.
We'll start and do a single binder. Grab some Ligero here. I always do entubado bunching. Have from the start and continue to this day. I've always thought it, do it right, provides a better draw. Really a precise construction, but you got to be careful with it. You don't get a lot of second chances. So anyway, just do these bunches. Get started. I always start with my Ligero because it's center. That's the other part that's tough to do this way. One thing is to keep Ligero centered. Usually follow that up with the Seiko.
So one of the things that's unique about this style, among many things, is that a lot of rollers actually never roll this way if they work for a factory. So even here in Esteli, this is considered a specialty. So you approach bunching this cigar differently. Normally we would start with a Seco. We build off of a Seco and go from there. And that's how you would do it on a Lieberman, which is a cigar rolling machine.
Yep. This is kind of an inside out way to do. I got to start with the center and work my way out.
Yeah. So even the different style mold is actually changing how he's bunching the cigar here.
And I start to tighten things up while it's still in my hand. Otherwise, it just gets out of control.
Can you explain the tightness? How tight you want to bunch it?
I want to get as much of the tightness in this to start with, so I don't have to overdo it with the paper. It's never tight enough to really smoke. If you take like a sample in a factory, when they do them without the molds, they're just making you a quick sample. Those are usually fairly loose. And this would be too if I left it like this. But trim off some there. Grab our piece of paper. And put in the paper just like you would with a wrapper. So just look at this as being another leaf. It looks like the wrapper. And it gets rolled. And this is where compressing it comes in. This paper tightens up a little bit with each turn. Get out here, and you can start to shape the head, and you're pinching the paper closed. So that'll be my first pass with that. We'll come back and unroll it, tighten it back up one more time. And let it sit for a bit.
So one of the things that you were telling me about this rolling style is even the paper today, because newspapers have become scarce, that it's become hard for you to maintain this rolling style. And you've been rolling this way, you're a master blender, you've blended cigars, have sold millions of cigars. And the style that he likes to roll in, particularly whenever he's blending for himself and working on blends, is challenged now.
Yeah. It's a challenge trying to find the right paper, because I've gone other places and tried to use other paper. The best has been newsprint. Broadsheets.
Yeah, they're called broadsheets. So that's that big sheet of paper that you see a newspaper printed on. It has a particular thickness, as you were telling me.
Once it's been, I think part of it is it's thinned out some once it's run through the printing presses.
Right. Okay.
So the printing press helps to soften it up and thin it out a little more.
Okay.
It gets, when you get anything that's a little bit thicker than that.
Yeah.
It makes it tougher to do that.
So it's
a bunch. You get it bunch rolled up in it.
So we actually didn't have newspaper here at the factory, but luckily we have a craft paper that we occasionally use for bunching and marking cigars into half wills and so
it's thin enough to work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is workable, but it's not as soft.
Not as soft.
It's not as supple. So the materials are changing. And modernization and technological improvements. Now you read your newspaper on an iPad or on a tablet or on your phone, even if you even read the newspaper.
The reason I started doing this is because I was in Honduras in a factory down there visiting, and I was complaining that I got to show me some way of doing this, that I don't need to carry around molds. I didn't want to be carrying a mold and a press with me everywhere I went.
Right.
Happened to be one of the older guys that was there said, try this. And he showed me the trick with the newspaper.
He showed him the hardest possible way.
Yeah.
That's what this kind man did to him, was he showed him the hardest possible way.
It was like, well, you might be able to do this.
Right. You might. We'll
see.
We'll see about it. Yeah. So I think that's not really well understood, that these are rolled twice in the paper.
Right.
To develop shoulder. You can trim to length at that point.
And that's a good tight bunch now.
And this is, you can't understand on video necessarily how tight these are. These are very, very tightly packed. And even when we roll Perlitos, little tastings of cigars, you have to bunch and roll those quite tight, but this is even more so. And sometimes in an evening, you might do 100 of these by hand or something like that.
Yeah. Long day to get 100 done in a day. Because it's not a quick process.
What's the maximum that you think you could do in a day with this process?
I've done 75 in a day.
75.
Because I just get tired.
Yeah.
After a while,
It really works your
it's
hands.
a lot of work in your hands and your all the way up through your shoulders.
Right. Working it back and
Yeah,
forth.
working it back and forth.
So that's part of the bunching. The mold is actually helping with the bunching, but the bunching process is also reversed versus what we would typically do here in the factory, to do this all by hand. After you form the shoulder, how much more time, or is it not really necessary that it spends more time in the? It's just to maintain it.
It's just to maintain,
to
maintain the shape where you're at. Because if you were to take that bunch out, set it on the table now, it would slowly start to loosen up.
Decompress.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, your compression would be gone on it.
So,
which doesn't happen so much with wood molds.
Right. Which in this case, this is really ready to have a wrapper put on it.
Yeah.
And it can set here for as long as it maintains some humidity.
If you had a really damp binder, which you want to avoid, if it was really wet, that paper, you leave it overnight, right. You'll have a nice drier bunch in the morning. You won't have that excess moisture in it. The paper will soak it up.
Perfect. Okay. Perfect. So
like a wood mold does. That's what's kind of interesting is everybody's going to plastic molds. People that make wood molds are kind of going away. We all gotten quite old. No one to pass it on to. Industry still needed molds.
Right.
And now they're being made out of plastic. You don't get any of that leaching of the excess moisture out of it with a plastic mold.
Yep. It's causing a lot of problems, really. The lack of leaching of moisture is causing a lot of issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have that problem with doing it this way.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kevin Baxter, for coming by and showing us the process. Tabacchiato. So the hardest way to build a mold and roll a cigar. He is a master blender. He makes it look very easy, folks. But I assure you that you don't want to do 75 of these a day.
No.
You barely want to do the 5 we've got here. But this has actually become his thing. So thank you for carrying this on.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so wood molds. Now that you understand Tabacchiato and some of the trade-offs around bunching and tightness, we can move on to wood cigar molds. Wood molds are really the undefeated champion of cigar molds. They solve a lot of issues you run into with the Tabacchiato style, and for well over 100 years, they have been the go-to standard for cigar making. They're proven, they're consistent, and they just work. There are also different forms of wood molds depending on what the factory is trying to accomplish. Some are designed to apply more pressure, some are designed to apply less, and some are intentionally designed so that they don't close at all. Those are called open form molds or canoe molds. A canoe mold is designed to shape the cigar, the outside of the cigar only, but also does one of the most important things a wood mold can do, which is to help extract humidity from the binder of the cigar. It's a really important step. That is one of the real advantages of wood molds. Historically, wood molds have been cost effective. They've been relatively simple to work with, but in the long run, they do require maintenance. And that's where a lot of problems just start to begin with wood molds. One key area of the process and maintenance is what we call spick and span. It's actually a nautical term. The spick is a pointed tool that you run across the surface to remove bits of tobacco that's laminated onto the surface of the canoe side. The span part is where you actually wipe or scrub the surface clean with a towel or a brush. And that process has to be done regularly on wood molds. Anytime molds are rotated out, anytime you change sizes here in the factory, anytime they go back to storage, they need to be maintained, and they need to be maintained properly. In a lot of ways, wood molds are like a fine pair of leather shoes. If you don't take care of them, they will deform. And over time, you will absolutely lose molds because of maintenance. The other complication that it has is many factories, that maintenance was just never done consistently. This has become exceptionally common in second and third generation factories where they're further removed from the deep craft side of cigar making. A lot of them moved away from wood molds very quickly because they kept running into overpressed cigars where the cigars are actually physically pressed too much in the mold. And that is an important distinction. A cigar that's a little tight is one thing. A cigar that does not draw is a completely different problem. Now, wood molds can absolutely contribute to that whenever they're not maintained properly. What happens is the wood dries out because it hasn't been oiled or cared for properly. The tobacco is not contributing enough moisture back into the mold, so the mold actually stays dry. Then the Banchero presses the mold, and they tend to keep pressing with more and more pressure because the wood feels like it's loosening. But that's not really what's happening. What's actually happening is the wood itself is shrinking and the mold itself is shrinking. And this side of the mold, we affectionately call the canoe portion of the mold, does not shrink in a perfect proportion to the spoon, which is the top half, which covers the top half of the cigar when they come together. The result is the cigar gets overpressed and can come out several ring gauges smaller than originally intended. Now, that is a very technical explanation, but we believe this happened regularly, and a good factory team will be able to identify when this is happening and stop it. And one of the reasons we believe that this was happening regularly is even today in Esteli, wood molds are oftentimes less than 10 years old. That tells you something. It likely means that factories were operating with very small mold rotations, maybe 10 or 20 molds per size tops. And sometimes you need as much as 30, even 40. And when you have that few molds in rotation, maintenance matters even more. If that maintenance is not happening, those molds wear out faster and have to be replaced much faster. All of that points to the very same conclusion. Understanding how wood molds actually work and how to maintain them properly was incredibly important. And that understanding really started to fade. It helped create the opportunity for plastic molds. Plastic molds are a much newer innovation. And in a meaningful way, they have really become part of the industry over the last 20 years or so. See if I can get this thing apart. So there's a lot of different variations of premium plastic molds. There's cheaper versions, more refined versions. There's still some fundamental disadvantages with a plastic mold. And the number one disadvantage is rigidity. These things bend like a potato chip when they're new. Plastic molds simply do not have the same rigidity that wood molds have. With wood molds, we often use an extra piece of wood made from mahogany or another dense wood to make the pressing action even more stiff and consistent. What you want is even pressure across the entire mold. That's a major challenge with plastic molds, especially injected plastic molds like the one we're looking at here. They tend to bow in the center, and when that happens, the cigars in the middle can end up being pressed a lot heavier or differently than the cigars that are on the outside. From quality control standpoint, this creates a real problem. It affects consistency and how the cigars actually draw, which affects you sitting in a cigar lounge or at home trying to enjoy a great cigar. In practical terms, what you often see is this. The center cigars end up really tight. The outside cigars end up much looser. So bracing plastic molds becomes its own challenge for the Banchero. In many cases, Bancheros end up building these really elaborate modified stacks or using different arrangements with the molds under the press to get a more even press. And we believe that tells you something. Injected plastic molds are not really a perfect solution. Now, the more advanced resin molds that are machined rather than simply injected, those molds are a little more complicated and a little bit more expensive to produce. But even then, you're still dealing with some trade-offs. Even though wood molds may still be more expensive over time because of maintenance, because they chip, because they wear, because they have to be cared for continuously, wood still tends to apply more consistent pressure across the cigars, which is really key. It also does something plastic molds don't do nearly as well, which is that they wick away moisture. I mean, in fact, the binder is oftentimes still really wet on a plastic mold whenever you take it out of the form. That matters a lot. A significantly drier binder gives the wrapper a better surface to adhere or laminate to. That becomes more important when you're making figurados or true box press cigars. If you want a real box press, you want that binder to be drier when the wrapper goes on. Otherwise, whenever the cigar is fully pressed in a box press, the binder can slip because it still is retaining too much moisture and it won't lock the wrapper into place. This is one of the reasons today many box press cigars will round out so quickly when they're no longer under pressure. Usually that is because the binder is still too wet. Instead of setting in place, it shifts under the wrapper. The wrapper really matters here, more than people tend to realize. Yes, the wrapper is very delicate, but the wrapper itself is also structural in so many ways. When it's laminated across the surface of the cigar in a way that holds everything together from the bunch to the binder together to maintain the final tension of the cigar, very similar to how that tabacchiato method works. This is also part of why splitting happens whenever the filler has more moisture than the wrapper and you start lighting the cigar. If you've been smoking cigars long enough, you already know that that's a real issue. Anytime the filler tobaccos are slightly more hydrated. So why did plastic end up changing the market? Well, the other thing that's happened here with plastic molds is something that wood molds did not suffer from nearly as much, and that was a narrowing availability of sizes. Now, what I mean by that is if you look at the current modern day cigar market, you'll notice a limited number of sizes that sell really well, and only a limited number of sizes that are produced consistently really well. And part of that is tied directly to how dominant plastic molds have become. And that brings us back to the bigger question is, why is it only paper or plastic? Why can't we just keep using wood molds if they work out so well? Well, the answer is really simple. Wood molds are handcrafted. Yes, machinery was used to help create consistency, especially for things like figurados and grand perfectos. But really, at their core, wood molds are still a handcrafted tool. Today, some of the most complex sizes and shapes of cigars have had to move over to plastic, such as this machined plastic mold I have here. It's actually machined resin. So for many years, plastic molds weren't able to produce these sizes in these formats. It's fairly simple as to why that is because plastic actually, when you machine it, it heats up and it moves and it deforms during production typically. It takes a very skilled machine shop to make something like this. And you're dealing with injected molded molds, such as the original one we're looking at here. Shapes like figurados and Solomons, consistency becomes a really big problem. And you're probably thinking it's injected, so why would that be an issue? Again, it goes back to pressure. The injected plastic oftentimes does not actually press evenly. And those more unusual shapes and sizes, that uneven pressure distribution becomes even more evident. In fact, a skilled roller can often feel in their hands that the form is slightly off whenever they're putting together a cigar from one of these molds. It creates a lot of rejects, a lot of failures. One of the reasons you've seen relatively few new sizes and examples of figurados and Solomons done in plastic molds is because of that. The best workaround for many plastic mold manufacturers has been to come up with a reduced number of cigars, such as maybe a 5-pack set that will allow you to press more consistently and keep the mold from heating up too much during manufacturing. This, for us, actually lowers overall efficiency, and it doesn't fully solve the problem that the wood molds themselves could solve. In fact, interestingly enough, we've actually seen some of the wood manufacturers start making things that are mimicking the plastic molds in an effort to keep up with the times and to continue to produce a quality product. There are some outstanding problems with how this particular mold presses cigars and how consistently it puts those cigars together, because it is based on a plastic form of a 3-pack or a 5-pack. So this is not an uncommon thing to see these days. Those unique shapes are simply harder to hold in plastic. In wood, those shapes hold much better because, again, the wood is not just applying pressure, it's also helping to remove humidity from the binder, which is locking in the internal structure of that cigar before the wrapper goes on. The difference really matters on something like this, especially a shape like a Figurado or a Gran Perfecto. And it's changed the landscape of your local humidor in more ways than people realize. A lot of fun and unusual sizes were much easier to find 20 or more years ago that have mostly disappeared from the market due to this. Walk into a local cigar shop today and you'll see that a lot of sizes or shapes that were rare or inconsistent to manufacture because of this issue are just simply gone. So why are we here now? Unfortunately, we are facing this paper or plastic discussion because the incredible families that have served this craft for generations have mostly either had to leave the business because of cost of materials or can no longer get the right materials to be able to continue their craft, or simply because they're aging out, unfortunately. And that's a real loss. We believe that this is a game-changing loss. One of the great historical names that was making cigar molds was Augusta Fuegat and Sons in Tampa. That name mattered. It represented a level of skill, a level of continuity that this industry benefited from for a very long time. Some of the greatest mold makers in the cigar industry made history by making truly exceptional wood molds for decades, using techniques that unfortunately mostly died with the people who created them on how to make these things so consistent. In a lot of ways, we're losing rare violins, a tradition that just can't be replicated. These molds have become collector's items among people who truly understand what they represent. So how do we fix it? Unfortunately, I don't think there's a real answer today. There's currently only one mold maker working in Nicaragua, here in Esteli, Nicaragua, who is still producing wood molds in the traditional way. But unfortunately, those molds do not have the consistency to meet our standards for our products. So we've often found ourselves working with some of these molds we're not really all that happy with. And that leaves us with a question that we're all kind of forced to ask: paper or plastic? It's deeply troubling to watch the handcrafted nature of this business change without a meaningful way to respond or improve upon it. So to summarize what we're talking about here, paper or plastic is where we're at today. Paper is way too difficult to do consistently at scale, as you heard from Kevin. Plastic is where we're at predominantly because it's what was available, but it's not actually a perfect solution. In some cases, with more complex sizes, we are quite literally putting plastic molds into dry rooms just to help wick away some of that moisture to compensate for what the mold itself is not capable of doing any longer. That's not a long-term solution. That's just where we are today. So that brings me to the final question. Would you rather smoke paper or plastic? Do you think this is a pretty devastating loss of knowledge for the cigar community? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious what you think. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Daniel Lance, co-founder of Domain Cigars, president of Tabacalera Family at Disla. Like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And thanks again. Please take care.